morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue reading A Prophet in Babylon with Chapter 21, Part A, Home at Last. The conversion of Stonecroft soon became public. Indeed, he himself courted publicity by writing a long letter to the Daily Light, in which he earnestly pleaded the cause of the League, and insisted on the new principle of conduct which he had discovered, viz., that those who make money in a city should live among those whom they employ. His letter naturally attracted great attention, and among those who read it was Dr. Jordan. Jordan was an obstinate but not stupid man. The astuteness which had enabled him to manage a church with success through so many years also gave him some power of reading the signs of the times. Stonecroft's letter startled him. He began to ask himself for the first time whether he had not been mistaken in his estimate of Gaunt and his work. When a man of Jordan's temperament begins to doubt his own infallibility, the disintegration of the said infallibility is rapid. Hitherto Jordan had had abundant faith in himself, and had justified it. Amid 100 contentions and disputes, some of them paltry enough, but others of real moment, he had never once found himself seriously mistaken. He had always chosen his ground with care, had measured men and occasions with cautious perspicacity, and had uniformly found himself upon the winning side. He was now to discover that astuteness and wisdom are very different things. In the presence of elemental forces, astuteness is a vain thing. It is little better than a child's trick. Wisdom would have recognized in the sudden and wide triumph of Gaunt's principles the upheaval of the elemental in men's thoughts. But this wisdom, the gift of the seer, Jordan did not possess. And so it needed the sudden conversion of a man like Stonecroft to make him aware of the truth of things. On a certain Monday morning, Jordan sat in the room at his church which he used as a study. It was a large, comfortably furnished room surrounded by bookshelves. In the earlier and happier times of his life, he had made but infrequent use of this room, preferring to do his intellectual work at home. But his home had become a desolation, and in these days he found its silence unbearable. He had driven his son away, he had virtually expelled Olivia, but their reproachful ghosts seemed to haunt the house. Their footfalls lingered on the threshold and stairway. Their voices echoed in the vacant rooms when the darkness fell, until he had grown afraid. He had hardly confessed this fear to himself. He had hitherto, in spite of his sufferings, had no misgivings about the course which he had pursued. He saw himself rather as a martyr, a man who was punished for the follies of others, not his own. But now, as he sat in his church study on this Monday morning, he became conscious of a new movement in his thoughts. His egotism was crumbling. His faith in himself had begun to waver. He was in the position of a man whose creed rests not upon broad principles, but upon the alleged accuracy of numerous details, consequently a man for whom the disproof of a detail is the dislodgment of the whole structure of belief. If he had been mistaken in his estimate of Gaunt, it followed that he had been mistaken in his treatment of Olivia. If he had treated Olivia harshly, if in her case he was wrong, perhaps he had also been very wrong in the harshness which he had shown toward his son. His pride struggled against the thought, but the hour for pride was over. Stonecroft's defection, for so he still called it, had inflicted a fatal wound on his pride. Here was a man of great wealth and social influence, the one man in Jordan's church who, more than any other, had stood for the old order of things. A man, moreover, of great astuteness of mind, not in the least liable to fanaticism, and he had suddenly become the public advocate of Gaunt's views. Jordan groaned in genuine bewilderment of spirit, and he had no longer the vigor to resent the blow that had fallen upon him. He had even begun to realize, with a pang of torturing humiliation, that it might be deserved. The bell rang. Jordan roused himself from his gloomy reverie. A visitor was climbing the stair. The visitor was Stonecroft. "Good morning, Doctor," said Stonecroft. "I thought I would catch you early before your day's work began." "I am always glad to see you," said Jordan, with a briskness of manner which was noticeably forced. Stonecroft sat down, and for some minutes the conversation ranged over conventional nothings. Each man was acutely conscious of the question which waited for discussion, but each shrank from introducing it. At last Stonecroft said audibly, "Well, Doctor, let us come to business. I want to speak to you frankly about the League of Service." "You know my views," said Jordan stiffly. "I know what you have announced as your views," corrected Stonecroft. "Isn't that a somewhat insulting distinction?" "It is not meant so," said Stonecroft. "At the time when Gaunt began his crusade, it was perfectly natural that you should take the stand you did. I entirely sympathized with you. But many things have happened since then. I should underrate your intelligence if I supposed that you were so bound to the fetish of consistency that you felt obliged to hold your first view in the case simply because you had publicly announced it. Quite irrespective, I mean, of the deductions which may be made from later developments." "I am not aware of any later developments that demand a change of view on my part," said Jordan, with a flash of his old obstinacy. "Doctor," said Stonecroft earnestly, "forgive me, but is that quite true?" "No, it isn't," said Jordan with a sudden capitulation which surprised himself. "I will confess that your own conduct has been so surprising that it has raised doubts in my own mind." "Doubts as to my conduct, or your own?" "Both," said Jordan. He was silent a moment, and then his misery spoke. "I am full of unhappiness," he said in a low voice. "I am no longer sure of myself. In 25 years of public life I have known many conflicts of opinion and principle, but I have never known the misery of the divided mind. I have never known hesitation. Hesitation has been perfectly abhorrent to me, as the worst form of weakness. That which I despised in others I now endure. I am ashamed of myself and of my confession. I do not suppose that you or any man can understand the pain I suffer." Stonecroft rose and laid his hand on Jordan's shoulder. "Yes, I understand," he said. "I can understand because I have endured the same torture. Do you suppose it was an easy thing for me to do what I have done? You call this torture the torture of the divided mind. Yes, it is that, but I suspect it might be more truthfully described as the torture of pride. It was my pride that was put upon the rack. It is really your pride that is there now. I believe that of all the hard things in life, the hardest is for a man who has always moved with the easy stride of complete assurance to say, 'I am wrong, I have done wrong.' The stronger a man is by nature, the harder it is for him to say it. But oh, the relief when it is said. My friend, you have often preached to me. Now it is my turn to preach to you. Do the hardest and bravest thing of your life. Have the courage to doubt your own wisdom." "But it's not altogether pride with me," said Jordan. "I'm not sure. That's the trouble." "Well then, let me put to you a question. Have you ever taken the pains to study what this League of Service means at close quarters? Have you examined its aim and its work?" "I have regarded it as a piece of unworthy fanaticism." "Regarded it? Yes, that is the mistake. You have stood aloof and measured it from a height of your own supposed omniscience. I did the same. Would it not be wiser to take nothing for granted, not even your own omniscience?" "Well, what would you have me do?" "Simply cease to judge and begin to examine. Get rid of the misleading words, fanaticism is one of them, and weigh the facts. I will make you a definite proposal. Give me this week. Let me show you the kind of things this crusade is actually doing. If at the end of the week you still disapprove, you will at least have more than a theory and prejudice to support you. But I shall be greatly surprised if you don't find yourself on our side before the week's end." "Don't assume too much," said Jordan. "I will promise you the week, but as for myself, I can promise nothing." "Very well," said Stonecroft cheerily. "That's understood. I'll call for you this evening about 6 o'clock, if that will do." "That will do," said Jordan. Jordan sat silent a long time after Stonecroft left him. His dominant feeling was a sense of overwhelming surprise at his own conduct. He had expected Stonecroft's visit. He had intended to make the occasion of lively controversy. On the contrary, he had capitulated without a struggle. More than this, he had exposed his own heart in a way which seemed incredible. Was it possible that these were the acts of Robert Jordan? That taciturn, reticent Jordan? who had always put a severe restraint upon his inner feeling, who had never even to his wife or child made a full exposure of his own soul? And had he done this to a man whom he had never even regarded as an intimate friend? He whose every act had been the fruit of calculation had allowed himself to be mastered by an impulse of confession wholly foreign to his previous instincts? And yet he was conscious of a sense of relief, as if of a burden lifted from his heart. What did it all mean? Another might have told him, but as yet he had no vision to discern the truth, that what he was experiencing was the birth of humility. His egotism was upon the cross, and through all, the cruel anguish of a soft voice whispered, "Lord, it is good for me to be here." It was as though a city had fallen, leaving erect a single belfry, which rang out to the awful sunset the thrilling Angelus, a high, thin note of mysterious consolation and disastrous ruin. A letter lay upon his desk in Olivia's handwriting. It had lain there for days unopened. He had vowed in the hardness of his heart to refuse all communication with the child who had deserted him. But now he took up Olivia's letter and slowly broke the seal. So much had happened that was contrary to his will that it seemed of little consequence if he once more obeyed his impulse rather than his habit. So he broke the seal. The letter bore no address and was very brief. "Dear Father," it read, "if your son should come back to you in love and honor, would you refuse him? Robert is alive and he loves you, but he will not, cannot come to you till you say, 'Come.' Will you say the word? He has been ill, he is now well, and his one desire is reconciliation with you. For myself I ask nothing. Do with me as you please. I plead not for myself, but for Robert. Tomorrow I shall be once more in New York, and will await your reply at Dr. Gaunt's house in Washington Square. Your child, Olivia." He looked at the date upon the envelope. It was a week old. So then his children had come to New York. They had waited, no doubt, for some sign from him, and all the time their plea for kindness had lain upon his desk unread. Robert is alive and loves you? Yes, and he loved Robert. He knew it now. The old affection, the old pride in his boy, the old hopes that he had cherished for his success in life, all those feelings that had once been his delight returned upon him now in torturing vehemence. Once more he had let occasion slip. He had failed to know the hour of his visitation. He had mismanaged his life with a folly truly tragic. He had lost his boy once through harshness which he no longer justified. He had lost him a second time through mere obduracy, so stupid that no defense was possible. Vaguely he became conscious of something that defied human calculation in these happenings. He heard over him the dark wings of fate beating the expectant air. He felt around him the fast-closing web of destiny. And yet, as these phrases flashed through his mind, he knew that they were false. Destiny, fate, these could not explain the paradox of his tragedy. What could? And as he groped for a reply, he felt as though a hand closed over him. A power not of himself was breaking him sinew by sinew, and he knew the name of that power. He fell upon his knees in great horror of darkness. His prayer was characteristic. "God, be merciful to me, a fool," was all that he found to say. And we'll stop there for this week. Next week we'll continue with Part B of Home at Last. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.